I fully understand that this is a weird question to ask in a city known for bicycles, but show of hands, who here drives a car? Oh, wow, that's actually a lot of you. That was like 50% of the crowd just said that. Second question, who here has ever heard of Apple CarPlay? Okay, almost everyone. So for the ones who don't know what this is, CarPlay is a feature that lets you use your iPhone on your car's console and then use all of the iPhone's capabilities totally hands-free while you're driving. And so according to Apple's marketing site, CarPlay is the ultimate co-pilot. It's the smarter, safer way to use your iPhone in the car. You can get directions, you can make calls, you can send and receive messages, and you can listen to music all in a way that allows you to stay focused on the road. So my boyfriend recently just bought a car, and he chose his particular model because it came with CarPlay. And he was super excited about it, so we decided to go on a little road trip down the coast of California to test it out. And I ended up documenting some of the more interesting moments of using it. So I made a little movie for us. It's called Here's What We Expected and Here's What We Got.
Using voice commands, Siri is ready to help you at any time, without being distracted or losing sight of what's important in your car.
Zoom the map out.
Okay. Ask Siri to play your favorite song. Play Little Ones, Catch the Movement.
Play Sufjan Stevens' The Black Hawk War.
The Black Hawk War, or How to Demolish an Entire Civilization and Still Feel Good About Yourself in the Morning, or We Apologize for the Inconvenience but You're Going to Have to Leave Now, or I Have Fought the Big Knives and Will Continue to Fight the by Sufjan Stevens now playing.
Send and receive messages.
You have 19 messages sent to the group Disney Park Sparkles. Today, Elaine said to the group. Attachment, 1 image. Today, Louis said to the group. Disliked an image. Today, Louis said to the group. Laughed at a movie. Today, Marco said to the group. https://yahoo.be/deahxkg. Would you like to reply to the group?
He spent a lot of money on that. Oh, that's real. Yeah, it's totally real. So it's pretty clear what went wrong here, right? Like, it's very obvious that no one, or at least it seemed like no one, at Apple had stress-tested CarPlay's designs in real-world conditions. Because if they had, they would have realized that when you go on a road trip, for the most part, your cell service is totally gone. Nor do most playlists look like they consist of perfectly short song titles. And the reality of driving is that when I'm a driver, I actually really need to see the map a lot more than I need to see a giant animation of Siri thinking. So this kind of train of thought has been talked about a lot today, and I really want to amplify this point, which is that creating things that stand up to reality is really friggin' hard. Because it's not just about using real data in your designs. Our responsibilities as product designers, or just designers in general, is to make sure that our products have to work for as many people as possible in all different scenarios, in all different environments. And honestly, that is almost an impossible task because we can't predict everything that will go right or wrong. And a lot of us don't get the pleasure of having giant user research groups or A/B testers or data analysts to help us out with this. Although I did hear that there were a bunch of Facebook designers here, so maybe you're not one of these. But for the majority of us, that was in a trash on Facebook. I like you guys. You guys are great. But for the rest of us, all we can really do is just to make sure that in our own process, we are taking the right approach to vet our work against the stresses of real life. And I wanted to kind of share some of the approaches that I've come across and the teams that I've worked on. So I am currently a design manager at a company called Lyft. For people who are not from the United States here, we are a transportation and ride-sharing company. The team that I manage is called Core Design, and we take care of Lyft's design system. And so we have a pretty high standard of quality for what we make. Everything we make needs to be designed with the utmost usability, covering all edge cases, and being able to capture a completely universal audience as possible. And what enables us to do this is a realistic understanding of how things like ergonomics, focus and attention, accessibility, and safety impact both our passengers and our drivers. So like Meili said, my previous job was as a designer on Apple's prototyping team. And our job there was to figure out how people will use and react to new technologies in their lives. And I think like one of the biggest takeaways from working on that team and also from working at Lyft was that prototypes, and when I say prototypes, I mean like the really crappy, kind of like ugly, quick prototypes are one of the single best methods to understanding how our designs are going to fare in the real world. And so hopefully prototyping isn't news to any of you because we are at a Framer conference. So I'm not going to go ahead and explain what it is, but I did want to talk a little bit about fidelity and about intention. So this is my kind of diagram of all of the different extremes that prototypes can be. You can have lo-fi, you can have hi-fi, you can have prototypes that are really aware of your context and prototypes that have no idea what's going on. And I think like the point that I'm trying to make is that we don't want to be here. We want to be here. And like one of like the things that I always try to communicate is that you can increase the fidelity of a prototype, but never get to a position where you know anything more about the design problem that you're solving. And so that's sort of like where this sort of danger zone happens. So you can imagine maybe you're like jamming on this awesome new digital watch interface on your computer, but then if it never makes it onto the wrist for you to actually try out, then you're not learning anything. So where we want to be is here, making super lo-fi prototypes that are being put into the context which they'll be used, and then iterating and iterating and iterating on them so that you can make higher fidelity prototypes. And then eventually those actually just become your demos, the things that you present to like executives or whatever to get buy-in or funding for your idea. And so here I'm going to show some strategies that we've been using at Lyft to add context into our early designs that are definitely on the lower fidelity side. The first strategy is sort of just take your designs off the computer. So an example of this is that when we were trying to understand passenger and driver ergonomics when they're viewing our app, one of our designers, Lindsay, she quickly, mocked up this prototype with selfie sticks she bought off of Amazon to mock up what the typical size for viewing distances are for drivers and for passengers. And this was really friggin' awesome because we were able to kind of carry these around in the design studio and test them out. And we would put like different components that we were making for our design system on them to test out like, oh, is it tappable from this area? Can I view it? Is the font that I've chosen legible? And so here is a non-interactive prototype, but what we were trying to ask is there was this big debate about whether all of our buttons should be pink because they're Lyft or purple because they're sort of Lyft. And so, like, to answer that question, what we did was that we brought all of the screens onto the devices that we would actually be using. So here they were on Android devices, and I don't know if you can tell from, no, not from the color calibration, but that Android model in particular was incredibly shocking, the amount of pink that was happening on that screen. And so we didn't want drivers to really have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. So we ended up going with purple. And then in our very recent redesign of our passenger app, we prototyped on devices so we could test out the reachability of important elements. And something that we decided on based off of this was to kind of bias all of the UI to the bottom of the screen. And so the reason when we can do that is so that if someone is, say, like just walking down the street, they're in a lot of busy traffic, they're carrying like a bunch of bags, they're able to request a ride from Lyft with just one hand without having to move up and down the phone. And one last example here is in the earlier stages of self-driving cars, when we didn't actually have the car, we made this scrappy prototype that was made out of like foam core and some office chairs. And we used it so that you can kind of really immerse yourself in like what the experience would be like if you're surrounded by like 3 of these screens. What is kind of like my, my vision arc here? What, like, how tappable are the elements on all of these displays? And then another tactic that we use is to act it out. So a lot of the interactions that we have with our app happen outside in the real world. So we tend to leave the office to kind of grab insights. This one was a really awesome example where, in order to mimic the situation of a passenger just trying to find their driver, we just had 2 people act like the car, and then the other one just had a clipboard that was their app or their phone. And this way, like, they were just trying to find each other on like a busy intersection. And it was a really great way to build empathy about, what the context of being on a busy, heavy trafficked street would be like while trying to have like a goal in mind. And so the thing I really loved about this is that it ended up like designing and prioritizing the content that we would put on our app without actually having to jump into any type of computer. And we've also done this with self-driving as well. So we invited a bunch of people to take like a fake autonomous vehicle, and we did that so that we could find out how their reaction would be to certain information on the screen versus what they were seeing out in the real world. And the prototype that we made, it was literally like an iPad that we just like wrapped a bunch of saran wrap over that headrest. So it took like 2 seconds to make. And then the last thing that we try to do is to use realistic data. Usually we don't always have the real data to use. So we try our best to simulate those conditions. For our self-driving explorations, for example, we didn't actually have the real sensor data for what the car would look like or what the car would see. So what we did instead is, that's very loud, we ended up driving a car around San Francisco and getting like recordings of all of the different objects that a car could sense in the environment. And this was just to immerse ourselves in like, what are all the objects that we have to pay attention to, like bikers or pedestrians, stop signs, or other cars. And this footage ended up informing a ton of rounds of designs that we were making to figure out how best to prioritize and visualize objects around the car. So as you can see, like even some of the basic like Unity prototypes, we didn't try to do anything special here. We just used like very basic rectangles to just corner out what objects were where. And from that, we kind of like iterated further and further and further into a higher fidelity, and then came up with this as one of our final-ish prototypes that we use to demo our confidence in this idea. So those were some examples of how we use contextual prototyping to remove the tunnel vision that can happen when you're just on your computer. Where we jump out of low fidelity and really get into the code is when we're trying to make design tools that help us bring even more context into our designs. So Kevin, and I don't know where he is, No, he's not going to raise his hand. So Kevin is here somewhere in this stage, and he's on our team. He made a set of tools for us that let us programmatically generate colors that work with both our brand and our accessible color contrast values on the web. And so I thought this was like such a fantastic prototype tool because you get to play with generating like multitudes of colors and then being able to see if they're accessible on white and if they're accessible on black. And we are actually thinking about open sourcing this probably next week. Yeah. That's claps for Kevin. So he also made us a tool to figure out the optimal font size and legibility of any given typeface that you would type into there. So basically, you type in Helvetica, it gives you what the font size should be for our passengers and what the font size should be for our drivers. And this was so incredibly useful because we were at the time searching for a secondary typeface to use in our app. And this sort of validated like Proxima Nova, which is what we ended up choosing. And then something our engineering team created for us was this prototyping tool that allows us to tactically interact and design screens with our design system components right on an iPad. And so that's kind of like really awesome because it's letting us get a more realistic feeling of our UI. And you're able to see things like what the loading state is, how the keyboard interacts. So it's pretty rad. Also, Framer X did not exist at that point, so this is why we had to do that. And so this is sort of where, like, when we're talking about the future of design and the future of design tools, this is what gets me absolutely excited, because this is what I want. I want tools that are bringing the designs that we make, the problems that we're facing, closer and closer to the actual reality that they're going to live in. And before I go, I just have one little kind of PSA to share. Please share your ugly first iteration prototypes, and please share your tools. We make it really hard on ourselves by only showing kind of like the best looking, most time consuming work that we've produced, when it's really the stuff that we learn from other experiments, other low fidelity prototypes that can really benefit other people to hear from. So thank you.